welcome to week 4 of 52 Reason and Record Tips. I'm James Bernard. Have you ever flipped the rack around in Reason or Record and looked at all the connections on the back and wondered, what are those for and what am I going to do with those? Well, this week's episode, we're going to cover some of those connections. We're going to focus on CV, which is short for control voltage, and gate. And these are two connections that can sometimes have people scratching their heads as to what to do with them. Back in the early days of modular synthesizers, you didn't have the luxury like you do now of just going to a preset folder and surfing through presets, finding a patch that's kind of close to what you want, and maybe tweaking it just a little bit to fit the need. Back then, if you wanted a sound, you had to make it from scratch. Modular synthesizers were essentially just modules, each one with their own dedicated purpose or function. Like you had oscillators, filters, envelope generators, and things like that. And they weren't really connected to each other. They had all these jacks with cables that would send out information, whether it was audio or control voltage, which is actual electric voltage, or gates and triggers. The connections that you had to make were physical. And if you've never done that with a modular synthesizer, this is something that can kind of twist your brain a little bit in Reason when you flip that rack around. So let's try to break it down. Let's use the analogy of a light bulb. If you take a light bulb and you have a light switch and you flip the switch on, the light bulb stays illuminated or lit. And when you flip the switch off, the light bulb turns off. Essentially, that's what a gate is. So with a gate, when you flip a switch, it turns on the light bulb or sends data out that says on. When you flip the switch off, now it sends data, now it turns that data off. So a gate is how long that data is going to be sent out, how long the light bulb is on, or how long that information is being sent out. So let's give you an example of that, and we'll look here at the screen, and I'm going to make my head disappear now so we can do some routing. As you can see here, I have a subtractor synth using a bass guitar patch, and that's just a factory default patch. Now we're going to create a matrix pattern sequencer while holding down the Shift key on your computer keyboard so it doesn't connect any of the cables. Flip the rack around, and let's connect the gate CV output of the matrix to the sequencer control gate input of the subtractor. Flip the rack around again, and we're going to draw in some gate triggers at the bottom of the matrix. Now press Run on the matrix. If you watch the screen, you can hear that the subtractor plays a note when it hits a step where the gate trigger is enabled or a level is up, and does not play a note where there is a blank gate step. The gate output of the matrix is also unique in that in addition to gate on and off, it's also sending velocity, or how hard the note is being played, out of that gate CV output. And we can make this effect more or less extreme in this patch by changing how velocity affects the sound in the subtractor over in this section. We can tweak the velocity to filter envelope amount and lower the cutoff and raise the resonance. All right, and I'm back again. So let's go back to our light bulb analogy now. Let's say on that same light bulb, on the switch, you also had a dimmer knob or a slider. And with that dimmer at its lowest position, you know that you're going to have very little light. And as you turn the dimmer switch or knob up, you get more light. That's basically what control voltage is. It's sending out data with a value of a minimum of 0 and a maximum of 127. And that data is going to decide how much or how little data is being sent out. MIDI notes on a keyboard, for example, are values of 0, 127. You can also control things like maybe cutoff frequency, LFO rate. Any knob or slider that's on the front panel of a device could have values of 0 to 127. And when you flip the rack around and look at those modulation inputs, that's what it's expecting, values from 0 to 127. So let's go back in and I'll show you how we're going to use this control voltage to change a parameter of the sound as well. And again, bye-bye. Now let's use the curved CV output of that same matrix to modify some parameters of this subtractor sound. Switch the matrix to curve mode instead of keys by moving this switch here. Next, let's draw in some values for the steps. Just so you know what you're doing, think of each step as its own slider or knob, or dimmer in the case of our light bulb analogy, with its own value.
Connect the curved CV output of the matrix to the filter frequency modulation input of the subtractor and set the value range knob to 127. Now play the pattern. Tweak the cutoff and resonance a bit so the effect is more pronounced. You might want to lower the filter envelope control as well. If you want to make this more interesting, let's try using a spider CV merger and splitter on the curved CV output like this. Create a spider CV merger splitter. Disconnect the curve output from the subtractor and connect it to the split A input. Now connect one of the split A outputs back to the filter frequency modulation input and the inverted INV, or opposite values, to the FM amount modulation input and turn that value knob up to 127. Flip the rack around and change oscillator 2's octave to a value of 1 and turn the FM amount knob up to 105. Now play the pattern. Pretty cool, huh? If you're feeling really confident now, let's try merging one of the split outputs of the CV spider with the LFO1 modulation output of the subtractor and connect that to the oscillator pitch input like this. Now we're getting somewhere. Now, the example I gave you here is using CV and gate for synthesis techniques, but of course, these could be useful for audio manipulation as well, since all of the mixer channels in both record and reason have CV inputs for level and pan. As you can see here on a mixer channel, you have those CV inputs, and if we were to create a 14 channel by 2 mixer, those also have CV inputs. You notice here, since I'm using record, when I select the device, you see how you don't see all those clutter of cables? That's a feature that's in record that's pretty cool. So anyone who has reason, when you use record, it's a lot easier to see what's connected and what's not connected. With record, you have the ability to intelligently hide the cables and only see the cables for the device that's selected and where they're routed. So another cool feature for those that want to upgrade.
Use some of the techniques we covered here to route CV from one device to another and see what you can come up with. Half the fun when using CV and gate is coming up with some happy accidents and getting unexpected results. Well, that's it for now. I'm going to continue doing a little bit of routing here, and I'll see you next week. And please keep those requests coming in to my email address for future episodes. Again, I'm James Bernard, and I'll see you next week. Bye.